Since men perpetrate about 90% of the world's homicides, it makes sense that almost all of history's most famous serial killers were men. They do, however, have a small number of counterparts, and they are just as deadly. Keep watching as we go through some famous female serial killers we know. Beverley Allitt, also called the Angel of Death. What does Beverley Allitt do? In 1991, nurse Beverley Allitt killed Liam Taylor, who was 7 months old. The next person she hurt was Timothy Hardwick, an 11-year-old boy with cerebral palsy. At first, no one thought anything was wrong, so she continued her violent spree without being stopped. She killed 4 young people, and she tried to kill 9 other people. When records showed that nurse logs were missing, it raised red flags. Being one of 4 children, Beverley Allitt, or the Angel of Death as she would later be called, showed some worrying behaviors early on. For example, she would put bandages and casts over her wounds to draw attention to herself without letting the doctors check out the injuries. As a teenager, she gained weight and became more and more attention-seeking, often acting meanly towards others. She spent a lot of time in hospitals getting medical care for several illnesses. Eventually, her perfectly healthy appendix was removed, but she kept on touching the surgical scar, which made it take longer to heal. She was also known to hurt herself and had to hop from doctor to doctor because doctors knew about her attention-seeking behaviors. Liam Taylor, who was 7 months old at the time, was her first victim. He was taken to the children's ward on February 21, 1991, with a chest infection. Allitt did everything she could to convince his parents that he was safe and sound, and she got them to agree to go home and rest. As soon as they got back, Allitt told them that Liam had a breathing emergency but had since recovered. She agreed to work extra hours at night to watch over the boy, and the boy's parents also decided to stay the night at the hospital. Just before midnight, Liam had another breathing problem, but it was thought that he had handled it well. But Allitt was left alone with the boy, and the boy's situation worsened. He had turned as pale as death before red spots appeared on his face, which was when Allitt called for help. Her coworkers in nursing were confused because there was no warning monitors on at the time, so when he stopped breathing, they didn't go off. Liam had a cardiac arrest, and even though the medical staff did everything they could, he had serious brain damage and could only stay alive with the help of life support machines. His parents made the heartbreaking choice to take their baby off of life support after doctors told them to. Heart failure was listed as the cause of his death. No one ever asked Allitt what she did to cause Liam's death. 2 weeks after Taylor's death, Todd Hardwick, an 11-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, who was taken to the hospital after having an epileptic seizure on March 5, 1991, became her next victim. Allitt took over his care, and after being alone with the boy, she called for help. The emergency rescue team found him blue and without a pulse. The team, which included a pediatric expert, tried very hard to bring him back to life, but failed. Later, an autopsy did not reveal a clear cause of death, but his epilepsy was officially blamed. 1-year-old Kaylee Desmond was her third victim. She was admitted on March 3, 1991, with a chest infection and seemed to be getting better. 5 days later, Kaylee had a heart attack in the same bed where Liam Taylor had died 2 weeks before. Allitt was there to help. The resuscitation team was able to bring her back to life, and she was taken to another hospital in Nottingham. During a thorough check, the doctors there found a strange puncture hole under her armpit. They also found an air bubble near the puncture mark, which they thought was caused by an accidental shot, but did not look into it further. The next person Allitt hurt was Paul Crampton, who was 5 months old and was admitted to the ward on March 20th, 1991, because he had a mild lung infection. Just before Paul was to be sent home, Allitt, who was again taking care of a patient by herself, called for help because he seemed to be in insulin shock and had gone into a near coma 3 times. The doctors were able to bring him back to life each time, but they couldn't figure out why his insulin levels were changing. She rode with him in the ambulance as he was taken to another hospital in Nottingham. It was found that he had too much insulin again. It was a huge miracle that Paul lived through the Angel of Death's visits. The next day, Bradley Gibson, 5, who had pneumonia, had a sudden heart attack and had to be revived by a team of professionals. After that, blood tests showed that his insulin level was high, which the doctors didn't understand. All its attendance led to another heart attack later that night. He was taken to Nottingham, where he got better. Even though there was a scary rise in strange health events happening around Allitt, no one was suspicious at the time, and she continued her violent spree without being stopped. On March 22, 1991, the victim, 2-year-old Yik Hung Chan, went blue and looked very upset when Allitt called the police. Oxygen helped him though. Because of another attack, he had to be moved to a bigger hospital in Nottingham, where he got better. It was thought that his symptoms were caused by a broken head from a fall. The next victims were Katie and Becky Phillips, twins who were only 2 months old and were being watched because they were born early. Becky came to the ward on April 1, 1991, because she had gastroenteritis. Allitt took over her care. 2 days later, Allitt called the police because she thought Becky looked low on blood sugar and was cold to the touch. But no illness was found. Little Becky was sent home with her mom. During the night, she had seizures and cried out in what sounded like pain. But when the doctor was called, he thought she might have colic. Her parents kept her in their bed to watch her, but she died in the middle of the night. Even after an autopsy, doctors still couldn't figure out what killed her. Katie, Becky's twin sister who lived, was taken to Grantham as a safety measure, and sadly, Allitt was there again. She didn't have to wait long before she had to call for help again because baby Katie had stopped breathing. Katie's heart and lungs did not recover from the first attack, but they did recover from the second one 2 days later. After another attempt to revive her, she was taken to Nottingham, where it was discovered that 5 of her ribs were broken and that she had major brain damage from not getting enough oxygen. In the strangest surprise of all, Sue Phillips, Katie's mother, asked Allitt to be her godmother because she was so thankful that she saved her baby's life. Even though she had hurt the baby's eyesight, hearing, and partially paralyzed the body, Allitt gladly accepted. After that, there were 4 more victims. But the high number of mysterious attacks on otherwise healthy patients, along with Allitt's presence during these attacks, finally made the hospital suspicious. Allitt's deadly rampage ended when 15-month-old asthmatic Claire Peck died on April 22, 1991. The baby had a heart attack while only in Allitt's care for a few minutes. The rescue team was able to bring her back to life, but when she was alone with Allitt again, baby Claire had another attack and could not be brought back to life. An autopsy showed that Claire's death was natural. Still, a consultant at the hospital, Dr. Nelson Porter, started an investigation because he was worried about the high number of heart attacks in the children's ward over the past 2 months. At first, it was thought that there might be an infectious virus, but nothing was found. After 18 days, the police were called after a test showed that baby Claire's blood had a high amount of potassium. Lignocaine was found in her body after she was buried. This is a drug that is used to treat cardiac arrest, but has never been given to a baby. Stuart Clifton, who was in charge of the investigation, thought there might have been foul play. He looked into other strange cases that happened in the past 2 months and found that most of them had insulin doses that were too high. More proof showed that Allitt had said the insulin refrigerator key was missing. All the records were reviewed, the victims' parents were talked to, and a security camera was put up. People started to think something was wrong when they saw that daily nurse logs for the time Paul Crampton had been in the ward were missing. Beverley Allitt was at all 25 of the strange events, involving 13 victims, 4 of whom were dead. This was the only thing that all of them had in common: the arrest and trial. Police thought they had enough proof to charge Allitt with murder on July 26, 1991, but she wasn't officially charged until November 1991. Allitt stayed cool and collected while being questioned. She denied having any part in the attacks and said she was only helping the victims. After a search, some of the lost nursing logs were found in her home. The police did more in-depth background checks and found a pattern of behavior that pointed to a very serious personality problem. Allitt showed signs of both Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which are both defined as trying to get attention by pretending to be sick. People with Munchausen's disease either cause fake physical or mental symptoms in themselves to get attention. People with Munchausen's by proxy, on the other hand, hurt others to get attention for themselves. It's not very common for the same person to have both diseases. Allitt's behavior as a teenager seemed typical of someone with Munchausen syndrome. When this behavior didn't get the response she wanted from other people, she started hurting young patients to get attention. While she was in prison, Allitt refused to say what she had done, even though many healthcare workers came to see her and gave her tests. Following several meetings, Allitt was charged with 4 counts of murder, 11 counts of attempted murder, and 11 counts of grievous bodily harm. As she waited for her trial, she lost a lot of weight quickly and got anorexia nervosa, which is another sign that she had mental health issues. Allitt was found guilty on May 23, 1993, after a trial that ran almost 2 months and that she could only attend for 16 days because she was still sick. She was given 13 life sentences for murder and attempted murder. It was the harshest sentence ever given to a woman. But Mr. Justice Latham said it was fair because she had caused terrible pain to the victims and their families and made nursing look bad as a career. Allitt wasn't sent to jail. Instead, she was locked up at Nottingham's Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security facility where most people detained under the Mental Health Act were kept. She did the things she did to get attention again while she was in Rampton, like eating ground glass and putting boiling water on her hand. Since then, she has admitted to 3 of the killings and 6 of the assaults she was charged with. Because of how horrible her crimes were, the Home Office has put her on a list of inmates who will never be able to get parole. Nanny Doss, the laughing granny. I was looking for the ideal partner, Nanny Doss said to authorities following her arrest for her husband's murders. Nanny Doss appeared to be a kind woman. She was always grinning and laughing. She spent time with her grandchildren, married, and had 4 kids. However, a trail of crime and death from the 1920s to 1954 was hidden under the cheerful exterior. At that point, Nanny Doss admitted to killing 4 of her 5 husbands, and the police thought she might have also slain a large number of her biological relatives. Nanny Doss's childhood. The narrative of Doss starts in Blue Mountain, Alabama in 1905, when she was born into a farming family. All 5 of Jim and Louisa Hazel's children stayed home to take care of the family farm and complete household tasks rather than attending school. Doss was riding a train when she sustained a brain injury at the age of 7. The head injury irrevocably impacted her life. When Doss was a teenager, her fantasy of enjoying a perfect life with her future spouse had already been realized. The young woman spent most of her free time reading romance publications, particularly the Lonely Hearts sections. Maybe she went to the romance mags as a way to get away from her violent father, while her mother chose to ignore it. Then, the union started. Nanny Doss married a man she had only known for 4 months when she was 16. Between 1921 and 1927, Charlie Braggs and Doss had 4 children together. That was when the marriage broke down. While Braggs' mother shared the same aggressive conduct as Doss's father, the happy couple nonetheless resided with her. Maybe her mother-in-law was a catalyst for Doss's murder rampage. That same year, 2 youngsters perished under suspicious circumstances. The children appeared healthy for 1 minute, and then they perished without a known reason. In 1928, the couple was divorced. Braggs left a newborn daughter, Florine, and his mother and ex-wife, taking his older daughter, Melvina, with him. Doss wed her second husband just a year after her divorce. Frank Harrelson was a violent drunk from Jacksonville, Florida. Through a Lonely Hearts section, the 2 got together. Doss replied to the romantic letters and pictures that Harrelson had written her with love letters. The marriage persisted for 16 years until 1945, despite the violence. During this time, Doss most likely stabbed her newborn granddaughter in the head a few days after the child was born, using a hairpin. Robert, her 2-year-old grandson, passed away from asphyxiation while in Doss's care a few months after her death. The older child of Doss and Bragg's, Melvina, was the parent of these 2 children. The murderer's next target was Harrelson. After a night of wild celebration at the close of World War II, Doss blended a secret ingredient into his secret moonshine jug. September 15, 1945, was less than a week after his death. Many believed he had perished from food poisoning. Simultaneously, Doss obtained sufficient life insurance proceeds from Harrelson's passing to purchase a house and a piece of land close to Jacksonville. Arlie Lanning of Lexington, North Carolina, passed away in 1952, a few years after answering Doss's Lonely Hearts classified ad. Doss, pretending to be a devoted wife, poisoned one of Lanning's meals, and soon after, he passed away. Because he drank a lot, the physicians suspected alcohol was the cause of the heart attack. Doss's next real love was Richard Morton of Emporia, Kansas, even though he frequently had affairs during their marriage. However, Doss wouldn't find out about this, as she was preoccupied with other issues. Following the death of her father in 1953, Doss's mother shattered her hip and required care. The woman passed away unexpectedly a few months after Doss volunteered to look after her. One of Doss's sisters unexpectedly passed away soon after her mother passed away, following their interaction with Nanny Doss. Doss was too preoccupied with her mother's condition to inquire about Morton's extramarital affairs. However, she gave her unfaithful husband her whole attention after she took care of her mother and sister. His death was a mystery. Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was Nanny Doss's last victim. He wasn't violent or intoxicated. He only erred in telling his wife that the only periodicals she may read and TV series she could watch were meant for educational purposes. She put poison in a prune cake. Samuel Doss was in the hospital for a month to recuperate. When he returned home, she gave him coffee laced with poison a few days after his return, and he died. This is the point at which Nanny Doss erred. During her 5th and last husband's month-long hospital stay, the physician who attended to him had suspected foul play, but he had no evidence. Therefore, the physician persuaded Doss to allow him to do an autopsy. Doss was scheduled to receive 2 life insurance payouts following the death of the 5th husband. The doctor indicated that the autopsy would save lives. Thus, it was a wonderful idea. Samuel Doss had massive levels of arsenic in his body, which is why the doctor called the police. 1954 saw the arrest of Nanny Doss. She quickly admitted that she killed 4 of her 5 ex-husbands, but not any of her relatives. When several of Doss's prior victims were unearthed, investigators discovered rat poison or unusually high levels of arsenic in their remains. It turns out that a widely used domestic item at the time was a highly effective means of killing people covertly. The grinning granny's signature tactic was to injure her loved ones by giving them food or drinks that were laced with massive doses of poison. Authorities believe she killed up to 12 people in all, the majority of whom were connected to her by blood. Doss attributed her violent adventures to brain damage. Journalists dubbed her Giggling Granny at the time because she would chuckle every time she related the tale of how she killed her late husbands. After completing a statement for Tulsa police, Nanny Doss smiles broadly and says she used rat poison to kill 4 of her 5 husbands. Even her motivation for killing her male friends was unexpected. She wasn't pursuing insurance proceeds. Doss claimed that the romance publications she read had a significant psychological impact. I was looking for the ideal partner, the true love of my life. Doss just killed off a husband when he got to be too much and moved on to the next victim. Or love, that is. Doctors and authorities never suspected anything because the majority of her spouses had other underlying medical disorders, such as heart disease or alcoholism. In 1964, Nanny Doss, who was serving a life sentence for murder of her previous husband, passed away in jail. Sacramento's most infamous female serial killer, Dorothea Puente. She looked like an old landlady from Sacramento. In reality, Dorothea Puente was a serial killer. The clean Victorian at 1426 F Street was well known to the Sacramento Police Department. On November 11, 1988, when they ascended the steps of the blue-green house, birds chirped from a decorative wishing well, and a tiny windmill swung idly on the tidy, flower-filled front yard. When the officers knocked, Dorothea Puente, the landlord, a small woman with white hair and Coke bottle spectacles, answered the door. Officers inquired about her recent sighting of developmentally handicapped 51-year-old Alvaro Montoya, whose social worker was concerned since they hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Tenant in Puente's house was his final known whereabouts. Despite denying any knowledge of Montoya's whereabouts, she allowed the officers to search the property. They quickly became aware of a disturbed area of dirt in the backyard. A cop asked Puente if they could dig up her garden. "Dig in my yard," she said with a shrug. "I have no idea what's out there." After digging for a while, they discovered a discovery that left them feeling sick to their stomachs. A woman's decaying body. Puente, wearing a long red coat and holding a bright pink umbrella, slipped away amid the chaos of phoning investigators and forensic teams. A few hours later, Lieutenant Joe Enlow of the Sacramento Police addressed the reporters assembled at the expanding F Street crime scene. Enlow acknowledged that they were clueless about Puente's location as body after body emerged from the earth. He claimed she went for a walk and never returned. The next 20 years were a whirlwind of arrests, jail terms, and scams. Puente served time for operating a brothel in Sacramento and earned a reputation among law enforcement for secretly cashing benefits checks sent to her tenants. To evade probation officers, Puente often assumed false identities, such as posing as Tea Senyola Nearda, an Egyptian-Israeli woman. Her fourth husband, Pedro Angel Montalvo, knew her as a doctor actor from a big Mexican family. Their marriage failed because of her extravagant spending, with Montalvo complaining to the Sacramento Bee. When Puente's renter, Ruth Monroe, passed away at her home in 1982, the coroner determined that she had overdosed on codeine and acetaminophen. However, during an interview with investigators, Puente stated that Monroe was depressed and had probably overdosed on purpose. The death was ruled suicide. Not even a month later, Puente was sentenced to 5 years in prison after another tenant, a 74-year-old retiree, claimed Puente had drugged him and stole from him while under the influence of drugs. In 1978, Puente had been placed on several years of probation for cashing dozens of her tenants' benefits checks. Everson Gilmouth, a 77-year-old native of Oregon, became Puente's letter buddy when she was bored in prison and drove down to California to pick her up upon her release in 1985, anticipating they would get married shortly. However, Gilmouth vanished from the map in November 1985 when Puente hired someone to help her with small renovations around the house, including building a 6-by-3-foot box with a lid for some trash she had wanted to get rid of. The next day, when the worker returned, she asked him to load the heavy box into the back of his pickup truck and drive them into Sutter County, where Puente chose a spot by the Sacramento River to leave the box. 2 months later, on New Year's Day 1986, a fisherman saw what appeared to be a floating coffin in the water. Sensibly, he called 911 instead of opening the box. And when the police arrived, they found a dead man inside. It would take 3 more years before Gilmouth's body was identified. His family continued to receive letters written by his new girlfriend Puente on his behalf. Eventually, however, the walls closed in on Puente. When police searched her backyard in November 1988 in an attempt to locate Montoya, They discovered 7 bodies, most of which were covered in sheets or tarps, one of which had been there for so long that the peach tree's roots had curled around it. The bodies were identified as Leona Carpenter, 78, Montoya, 51, Dorothy Miller, 64, Benjamin Fink, 55, James Gallup, 62, Vera Faye Martin, 64, and Betty Palmer, 78. Distressed neighbors complained to the media for months about the smell from the well-kept backyard, saying we couldn't stand it. There were more concerns regarding Puente's boarding home than just that. Her tenants always seemed to be disappearing, but because Puente frequently took in struggling or addicted people, when social workers asked about them, she just said they must have moved along. A neighbor claimed Puente was possessive about the property, saying if somebody walked on her lawn, she would cuss at them in a language that would make a sailor blush. She was accused of killing 8 tenants, including her ex-boyfriend Gilmuth and Monroe, who had previously been found to have committed suicide. The prosecution said that she drugged each person, strangled them, and then kept receiving their benefits. She used day laborers to dig graves in her backyard, filling them in once the bodies were secretly disposed of. 3 of the 9 murder counts were found guilty by the jury after a month of deliberations. Finally, it was enough to land her a life sentence in prison. And there you have it. Some women are not just as innocent as they seem. What's your biggest takeaway from this video? And if you'd pick, who's the worst among them and why? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments section.